July 24th, 1997. Lander, Wyoming. 10:30 p.m. Yeah, hey. I've got a person missing here, I think, and I wondered if you had a spare around any place. Those were the words spoken by Steve Bechtel in a phone call to authorities in Lander, Wyoming, as he reported his wife missing. Her name was Amy Wroe Bechtel. She was 24 years old at the time she disappeared. 19 years passed with no confirmed answers. No trace of where Amy went, aside from what was found inside her car in the early morning hours near the Burnt Gulch turnoff. Amy was a runner, and a remarkable one. She was an elite long-distance athlete at the University of Wyoming, holding the school record in the 3,000 meters indoors and ranking second all-time in the 5,000 meters indoors in 1995. With a personal best marathon time of 3 hours and 1 minute, Amy had a clear ambition to qualify for the 2000 Olympic marathon trials. At the time she disappeared, she was actively preparing for that goal. Amy was the kind of person who made others believe that hard work and kindness still mattered. She lived simply, with discipline and sincerity, a dependable friend, a deeply loved daughter, an athlete who respected her limits and pushed them carefully day by day. She didn't run only for medals or results. She ran for the feeling of freedom, for the honesty of each step, and the quiet promise that effort would eventually mean something. Those closest to Amy remember the same things. She was always on time, always communicated her plans, and always came home. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't impulsive. Her passion was intense, but it was guided by responsibility and reason, which is why her disappearance, in broad daylight under stable weather conditions on a familiar road, left more than shock. It left a deep and lasting ache, a good person, a focused life, a future clearly in motion, suddenly taken away without a goodbye. From that moment on, theories began to form. An accident, a tragic coincidence, or the possibility that someone intervened at the exact moment she was most vulnerable. Close relationships were questioned. Her husband, Steve Bechtel, became one of the subjects of scrutiny. An outsider with a violent past later appeared in the case file. Dale Wayne Eaton. Leads surfaced, then collapsed. Suspects were named, then could not be proven. And after more than 2 decades, with evidence, witness statements, and multiple investigative paths laid side by side, one question still remains. Are we missing the truth? Or was something crucial seen long ago, but never fully understood? In today's video, we will examine what may have happened to Amy on that day, the primary suspects connected to the case, and most importantly, what this unanswered loss has meant for the family who loved her, saw her every day, and believed she had a bright future ahead. If you're interested in real cases, unresolved mysteries, and careful analysis grounded in facts and context, consider subscribing. This story is not told to spread fear. It is told so that it is not forgotten. Everything you're about to hear is based on documented sources, shared with the intent of accuracy, responsibility, and respect for the victims. Amy lived in the town of Lander, a small, quiet community where people tend to know each other more than they realize. She was the youngest of 4 children. Her parents were Dwayne Wroe and Joanne Wroe. Not long after Amy was born, the family moved to Jackson, Wyoming. She spent most of her childhood growing up in Jackson and Douglas, Wyoming. In 1992, while attending the University of Wyoming, Amy met the man who would later become her husband, Steve Bechtel. After graduating, the two moved to Lander, Wyoming, and were married in June of 1996. Steve Bechtel was not a stranger in the Lander community. He was a professional climber, a fitness coach, and someone who had spent his life in the mountains of Wyoming. Amy and Steve had been married just over 1 year. After graduating from the University of Wyoming in Laramie with a bachelor's degree in exercise physiology, the couple settled in Lander, a town of roughly 7,000 people. They lived at 9 Lucky Lane, a small white house in a cluster of 12 modest homes originally built for miners, known locally as Climbers Row. The Bechtels rented their home from neighbors who would later become part of the story, Todd Skinner and Amy Whistler. Skinner was a world-renowned climber and a frequent climbing partner of Steve's. He would later die in a tragic fall at Yosemite National Park in 2006. On July 24, 1997, Amy's day began in town. She taught a fitness class, ran errands, and stopped by a local photography business to ask about a photo competition. At the same time, Amy was organizing a 10-kilometer race scheduled to take place in Shoshone National Forest on September 7, 1997. After finishing her activities in town, Amy reportedly drove through Sinks Canyon State Park and continued onto Loop Road, a remote route that cuts across the Wind River Range toward South Pass. She went there to rehearse the course for the 10K race she was organizing. That same day, Steve spent the entire day rock climbing near Dubois, Wyoming. He was with Sam Leitner Jr., a travel writer and close acquaintance. Leitner confirmed that Steve was with him throughout the day. Years later, when reflecting on the continued scrutiny he faced from investigators, Leitner said, "I actually got along better with Amy than I did with Steve in Australia. I would never cover for someone who might have killed a friend of mine." The trip to Dubois and Leitner's account would ultimately serve as Steve Bechtel's alibi. An alibi that has never been disproven. When Steve returned home that afternoon, around 4:30 p.m., Amy wasn't there. At first, he didn't panic. In Wyoming, cell phone service is often unreliable. Long outings aren't unusual. But as night fell and the silence continued, around 10 p.m., Steve called Amy's parents to ask if they knew where she was. They didn't. Shortly after, he contacted the police to report Amy missing. Steve took part in the early search efforts, with fellow climbers, with volunteers, and alongside law enforcement. From the outside, their marriage appeared quiet. No public conflicts, no scandals, no visible instability. Everything pointed to Amy being in a stable phase of her life. She had goals. She had direction. And she had every reason to come home at the end of the day. That's why, when Amy disappeared, what troubled investigators most wasn't what they found. It was what was completely absent. No signs of depression. No clear personal conflict. No reasonable explanation for why someone like Amy would vanish voluntarily. And that's when this case began to feel truly dangerous. July 24th, 1997, Lander, Wyoming. It was a stable summer day. Dry weather. No heavy rain. No dense fog. No weather warnings reported in the area. Visibility was good. Temperatures were mild. Conditions were ideal for outdoor activity. There was nothing in the environment that would have posed an immediate threat to an experienced athlete like Amy Wroe Bechtel. That morning, Amy left home in a normal state of mind. No unusual notes, no emergency gear, no comments suggesting she felt unsafe or uneasy. She had things to do. A clear plan, and every intention of returning. By early afternoon, Amy was still moving about the town of Lander. She was seen at a local photography shop. This would become the last confirmed sighting of Amy Wroe Bechtel. July 24th, 1997, 2:30 p.m. Amy walked into the upstairs portrait studio at Camera Connection in downtown Lander, still dressed in her running clothes. She didn't look like she'd already been running. Lonnie Slack, who was working part-time at the studio at the time, later recalled. She wasn't sweating. She looked like she was about to go running. Amy brought in several photographs to be framed. She spoke excitedly about her upcoming work for the Sinks Canyon photography competition. She stayed for about 15 minutes, then left through the back door. It was after lunch, Slack said, probably around 2 p.m. After that, Amy left town. Alone. She drove toward the mountains on the outskirts of Lander, heading in the direction of Shoshone National Forest. And at that point, what had once been considered a normal late return began to take on a different meaning. Amy Wroe Bechtel may have been in trouble. Her family waited, reassuring themselves with the most reasonable explanations. But time kept passing. No phone call, no message, no sign that Amy was on her way home. The waiting slowly turned into worry, and in missing person cases, this is always the most dangerous moment. The moment when hope and fear begin to trade places. At the same time, not far from town, the Wyoming wilderness was slipping into darkness. No traffic noise, no lights, only wind and empty forest roads. A place that looks familiar in daylight, but becomes something entirely different after nightfall. No one knew where Amy Wroe Bechtel was at that moment. No one heard a cry for help. No one saw a figure moving through the dark forest. If Amy was injured, there was no one there to help her. If she was running, no one saw which direction she went. And if something had already happened, then the forest kept it all. No one in Amy's family knew that. While they were waiting for a phone call, somewhere out there, a scene already existed. It simply hadn't been found yet. And then, in the early morning hours, when Amy's car was discovered, those two timelines finally collided. But by then, Amy was no longer there. Around 1 a.m., July 25th, 1997, while canvassing the forest roads around the area, Amy was believed to have visited. A deputy with the Fremont County Sheriff's Office made a discovery. A car parked along the roadside. It was Amy Wroe Bechtel's vehicle. Loop Road, a narrow forest road, dark and with almost no traffic at night. The car was unlocked. There were no signs of forced entry. Inside, several personal belongings were still there. But Amy was not. No one at the scene reported hearing a scream. No one saw a woman leave the vehicle. There were no visible signs of what had happened. The car sat there in silence, as if the driver had stepped away and never returned. From that moment on, this was no longer a late outing. It officially became a missing person case. And what confused investigators most wasn't what they saw. It was what was completely absent. No clear crime scene. No direction of travel. No indication of how Amy had left that spot. Only the forest. A dark road and a car abandoned in the Wyoming night. The investigation began with the simplest explanation, an accident. In missing person cases in Wyoming's mountain regions, this is always the first possibility considered. Dense forest, steep terrain, deep ravines, areas where a single misstep is enough to disappear from view. Investigators asked, did Amy leave her car to walk a short distance? Did she slip, get injured, or fall into an area not visible from the road? Another possibility was also considered. Could Amy have been attacked by wildlife? But the more the theory was examined, the more problems it raised. Amy was not inexperienced. She knew mountain terrain. She was accustomed to being alone in environments like this, and more importantly, the weather that day was stable. No rain, no heavy fog, no extreme natural conditions that would have posed an immediate threat. If Amy had been seriously injured, investigators believed she would have left some kind of trace. A slide mark, a footprint, a piece of clothing, anything. But there was nothing. The search expanded. K-9 units, helicopters, hundreds of volunteers fanned out in every possible direction. The result? Zero. No biological evidence, no clear direction of travel, no indication that Amy ever left the road in a state of panic or injury. And as the accident theory began to collapse, the investigation was forced to turn in a different direction. A direction that made the atmosphere heavier. If Amy hadn't suffered an accident, then the next question was far less comfortable. Had someone else been on that road that night? When the accident theory could no longer hold, investigators returned to where everything began. The town of Lander, and the people closest to Amy. In every missing person case, the next question is always the same. Who was the last person to know the victim's plans? The answer was her husband. Steve Bechtel was a professional climber. Comfortable with risk, accustomed to spending long hours outdoors. On July 24th, 1997, Steve was not with Amy. He was on a climbing trip with friends. His alibi was confirmed by the people with him. There was no evidence that he left the group at any point that day. At the time, Lander was emerging as a major climbing town. Within that world, Todd Skinner, and to a lesser extent Steve, were well-known figures. To some residents, the climbers who were shaping the town's new identity felt like outsiders, drifters with no conventional jobs, tight-knit and private, almost cult-like. But in an investigation, an alibi is not the end. When police searched the couple's home, they found journals and poetry written by Steve. Some passages contained violent imagery, anger, control, dark thoughts. Not evidence of a crime, but enough to make investigators pause. When asked to take a polygraph test, Steve refused. On the advice of his attorney, he stopped cooperating with police. As Amy's disappearance unfolded, the town of Lander became divided. The climbing community and members of NOLS rallied around Steve, defending him as it became clear that authorities were scrutinizing him. That solidarity only deepened suspicion among other townspeople, fueled by pointed questions from law enforcement and Amy's family. The absence of a body, or even any sign of violence, pushed Steve to the center of the fog surrounding the case. After all, he was familiar with many of Wyoming's remote mountain areas. Yet in the days immediately after Amy disappeared, Steve was not treated as a primary suspect. He helped lead search efforts. He was actively involved. In fact, during those early days, investigators didn't even consider the possibility of homicide. But in a case with no concrete leads, that refusal created a noticeable gap. Another statement added to the uncertainty. A witness claimed that, on the day Amy disappeared, they saw a pickup truck similar to Steve's near the Loop Road area. No license plate, no precise time, no independent verification. Just a statement. Steve has always maintained his innocence. Still, about a week and a half after Amy vanished, Steve drew public attention when he hired an attorney and declined to take a polygraph test. Polygraphs are like one of those monkey traps, Bechtel has said in later years. Anyone who needs me to take one, I don't need them in my life. Despite the scrutiny, he was never charged, never formally accused. But from that point forward, his name became impossible to separate from the investigation. And in a small town like Lander, suspicion spread faster than evidence. The central question remained, if the husband was involved, why was there no physical evidence? And if he wasn't, then what else happened on that forest road on that day? September 28th, 1997. Race morning arrived under clear autumn skies on the eastern slopes of the Wind River Range. Around 150 runners gathered for an emotional effort to complete the 10K course Amy had worked so hard to organize before she disappeared. The route was a steady uphill climb, warm, dusty, and winding along the gravel curves of Loop Road, leading toward Fry Lake, where divers had searched for a body. Many of the runners had taken part in the search for Amy, or had personal ties to her through running, or to Steve. There were staff members from NOLS and professional climbers, people who ran to stay fit, but didn't consider themselves runners. Amy's sister, Jenny, was there, and so was Steve. By then, under close watch from investigators and a large portion of the Wyoming public, who viewed him as the primary suspect. Before the race, Steve spoke calmly to the group. Amy had wanted to do this race for years, he said. She was told that only 8 of her former track teammates would be coming. The statement was met with applause, but after local searches failed to bring answers, Amy's mother, father, brother, and 2 sisters returned home and tried to continue with lives that would never be the same. Each family member grieved differently, but their frustration over Steve's refusal to fully cooperate with investigators remained. Years later, Amy's father, Dwayne, told a news outlet, "I still feel angry, because if he wasn't guilty, that bastard should have taken the polygraph and let us have some peace." Amy's brother, Nels, was particularly outraged by Steve's unwillingness to take the test or fully cooperate. When Amy's sisters, Casey Lee and Jenny Newton, appeared on the Geraldo Rivera show, alongside Detective King, the host publicly urged Steve to cooperate more fully with authorities. Not long after, Amy's father passed away, without ever knowing what happened to his daughter. Amy's mother endured the years that followed. Not knowing what happened to Amy, or who was responsible, has haunted my mind, she said. It made me angry, deeply angry. It took me a long time to learn how to live with it, and some days it still overwhelms me. With no clear evidence, Steve was eventually officially removed as a suspect. But one detail remains worth noting. People often speak of Amy only as a victim, rather than as a person. And yet, by many accounts, Steve continued to think about Amy often. "It breaks my heart," Steve said. "She was so cool. Her greatest fault was that she was so friendly, she was always taken advantage of. I'll cover your shift. I'll watch your dog. That's what makes this so painful." With the primary suspect cleared, and no definitive answers found, when the truth did not appear to be inside the town, the investigation was forced to look outward, toward another danger, quieter, less visible, and far harder to control, away from familiar relationships, away from known faces, and into a far more dangerous space, the wilderness. In missing person cases in Wyoming's mountain regions, the greatest threat is not always someone close. Sometimes, it's a stranger. Someone passing through. Someone who disappears before anyone realizes they were ever there. The name that caused investigators to stop and take notice was Dale Wayne Eaton. Eaton had a history of violence. Years later, in 2004, he was convicted of murder for the 1988 killing of Lisa Marie Kimmel in Wyoming, after a jury found him guilty. But in the summer of 1997, Eaton was still free. And more importantly, he had been present in Wyoming at the exact time Amy disappeared. Tracy Svay was born and raised in Waltman, Wyoming, about 40 to 45 miles from Lander. She had known Eaton since childhood. He was a friend of her father's and even played cards with her family. Tracy believed that a piece of land in Natrona County, where Eaton had once stayed, near several old cabins, might contain clues connected to Amy's disappearance. She later said she revisited Eaton's old vehicles, ones that police had previously examined during the early investigation, and discovered documents dated around the time Amy went missing. Specifically, a gas receipt with a date matching the window of Amy's disappearance. Additional papers, including a newspaper clipping, also dated near that same period. Tracy explained that she was prompted to re-examine the vehicles after experiencing strong, vivid impressions, including dreams she couldn't explain, which led her to look again at the items inside the cars. Fremont County Sheriff Lieutenant John Zerga later stated that he didn't necessarily believe in intuition or dreams, but he also said that what Tracy uncovered was worth looking into. According to Zerga, cadaver dogs could be brought in to search the areas Tracy identified to evaluate whether any physical evidence might still exist. And while Eaton had a documented pattern of approaching women in isolated areas, places with no cameras, no witnesses, and little chance of timely rescue, that pattern, while deeply troubling, was not proof. In criminal investigations, similarity does not equal truth. And so, once again, the case found itself balanced on uncertainty, with a theory that felt plausible, dangerous, and haunting, but still unproven. Dale Wayne Eaton was never charged in Amy's disappearance. He never confessed, and there is no physical evidence directly linking him to Loop Road. What remains is a possibility that has continued to haunt investigators. If Amy encountered a stranger on that road, then it would have been a situation no one could have predicted. No prior connection, no visible conflict. Just a single moment of wrong place, wrong time. And if that happened, the forest would have been the perfect place to conceal everything. Over the years, Eaton became one of the most suspicious figures connected to the case, and at the same time, one of the hardest to prove. That contradiction is what pushed the case into a standstill. Because when every theory has a weakness, the truth doesn't disappear. It only sinks deeper. It wasn't until Eaton was convicted in 2004 that another attempt was made. Nels Wroe, Amy's brother, tried to interview Eaton while he was still alive. At that point, Eaton was serving a life sentence without parole for the murder of Lisa Marie Kimmel. His attorneys refused to allow it, Wroe said. So that was deeply frustrating. Wroe added that information about Eaton's whereabouts at the Waltman property near Casper was particularly significant. "I've received a few phone calls," he told Cowboy State Daily in a message, "and we are definitely paying close attention to this information. Our family is working closely with the investigation, both local law enforcement and the FBI, especially regarding Dale Eaton. Tracking Eaton's movements during the window of Amy's disappearance has long been a priority," Wroe said. He added that the family will continue searching for answers about what happened to their loved one, and that they appreciate any leads that come forward. "This matters to all of us," he said. "It matters to Wyoming." Our state is one large family, and I'm grateful to the entire Wyoming community for continuing to support us in the search for Amy. Even so, the family's efforts have never produced a resolution. The case has never truly closed. From time to time, a new lead appears. In 2003, a local physician discovered a sports watch near a river area not far from where Amy disappeared. The watch looked similar to the type Amy often wore. But there was no serial number, no identifying mark, no evidence to confirm it ever belonged to her. That lead opened a brief window of hope, then quickly closed. In the years that followed, searches were revisited. Old statements were reread from the beginning, but each time, the outcome was the same. No body, no new physical evidence, no single detail strong enough to break the stalemate. And then, decades later, another lead resurfaced. Someone who had once lived near an area connected to the outside suspect believed that several old structures might have concealed something. Law enforcement reviewed the information, re-examined the files, considered whether another search was possible, but to this day, there has been no breakthrough, because with each passing year, the truth is worn down by time. Witnesses grow older. Memories fade. And the landscape itself has changed forever. The disappearance of Amy Wroe Bechtel did not end with a confession. It did not end with a trial. And it did not end with certainty. Many have said that if Amy had felt unsafe, she would have returned to her car immediately. The running community across Wyoming and neighboring states joined the search. They understood the terrain, they understood the risks, and they understood Amy well enough to know this was not a simple mistake. After days with no results, initial confidence gave way to confusion. No mechanical failure was found. No clear, poor decision. No moment where Amy lost control. And that is what frightened them most. Because if someone like Amy could disappear without a trace, then it could happen to anyone. In the early years, family and friends still believed Amy could be found. But time did not bring answers. Eventually, for legal reasons, Amy was declared deceased. The family never held a complete funeral. No body. No final moment. Only a long, enduring absence in the lives of those left behind. And even today, those who knew Amy still say the same thing. She wasn't the kind of person who would disappear without an explanation. Perhaps the most painful part belongs to the people who remained. For years, Amy Wroe Bechtel's family has continued searching, not for closure, but for even the smallest remaining trace. They never truly received an ending. No body to lay to rest, no goodbye. Only waiting, stretching from one year into the next. To them, Amy is not an unsolved case. She is a daughter, a sister, a part of their family who vanished without explanation. And while the law was forced to declare her gone, that never meant the family believed the story was over. For more than 2 decades, they have followed every new lead, every name revisited, every possibility, no matter how fragile. Not because they need someone to blame, but because they need the truth, no matter how painful that truth may be. And even now, what gives this case its weight is not only the question, what happened to Amy? But the question left for those still waiting. Will her family ever know where Amy went on that final afternoon? Or will silence be all that remains? If you've followed this case, share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes, unsolved cases continue to exist, not because answers are impossible, but because the right questions haven't yet been asked. If Amy's story made you pause, if you feel the loss of a life left unfinished, leave a like. Not for this video, but for Amy, and for those who disappeared without ever receiving answers. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told with respect, grounded in truth, and not forgotten with time, consider subscribing. Every subscriber is one more person who remembers them. And sometimes, being remembered is the last thing the missing have left.